it's really hard for us to understand how God works in our lives, right? Whenever a specific thing happens, often we want to try to figure out, where is God in this? You know, what is he doing? Why is he doing it this way? Why isn't he doing anything? And we are not ever going to understand all of the ways of God. He tells us that in his word. We can't comprehend how he works or why he does what he does. But there are a couple of things that we do know that we can stand on whenever we are questioning what in the world is going on. And so that's what we're going to talk about today at the end of this lesson is, what do we know about how God works, so that at least we don't have misperceptions of him. We are not ever going to completely understand God, but we don't want to misunderstand him, right? And so all through David's life, we see God working. And today we're going to see that he actually withdraws his hand of protection from David in certain ways, and then protects him and completely orchestrates certain things to keep him protected and to make things happen the way that he wants them to happen in other circumstances. And so let's go ahead and go through this story. We'll see how God is working in David's life, and then we'll talk about what the Bible says about how God intervenes in our lives and why sometimes maybe he doesn't intervene. So if you will remember, we've been going through this long story that started with David and his sons, and one of the sons raped one of the half-sisters, and then his other son killed him for that. He was in exile for several years. David finally brought him back, and they seemingly have reconciled, and then all of a sudden Absalom turns on him, and he has run David out of Jerusalem. And so that's where we pick up our story today. David is in exile, and Absalom is just now coming into the city of Jerusalem to, sit there as king. That is where we are starting today. And remember that he has his counselor that he has brought with him that used to be David's counselor, Ahithophel. This is Bathsheba's grandpa. And he has decided to leave David and take Absalom's side. And so both of them come in along with all of the men that have gathered around him from all of the other tribes. And they arrive at the gate of Jerusalem at the exact time as Hushai arrives there. And remember, Hushai is David's friend. He actually is on David's side. He went to David, and David said, "You would be more useful to me if you would go back and advise my son, be an opposing counsel to Ahithophel, so that he can't, come and hurt me, so that Ahithophel's counsel turns to foolishness." That's what he asked God. David said, "Please turn Ahithophel's counsel to foolishness, and don't let his plans prevail against me." And so he asks Hushai, "Go and be an opposing counsel so that Absalom can't come and kill me, so that the plans don't work." And so he comes into the city at the same time as Absalom, and he says, "Long live the king." And Absalom's like, "Wait, you're my dad's friend. Why aren't you with him? You're not a very loyal friend, are you?" And he says, "No, I'm actually not. I'm not a loyal friend because I'm not loyal to your dad. I'm actually loyal to the throne. And so I'm here to serve whoever God and the people select as king. And better for me that it's David's son. And so I'm willing to serve you." And this seems like a good enough answer to Absalom. And so he says, "Okay, you can come into my council too." But he turns to Ahithophel as his first act. He wants to know, what should I do? What should my first act as king be? And in verse 23 of chapter 16, it says that the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, was taken as though one inquired of the word of God. So was his advice regarded both by David and by Absalom. So basically, whatever he says, they feel like he is saying it like it's the gospel truth. That's how they're saying it here, as if God has given him the word himself. And so he says, what should I do? And Ahithophel doesn't give him the words of God. This is not something that God would say, and we will talk about that at the end of our lesson. But he gives him advice that all of the other people in all the other nations, things that they would do. Back then, if you would conquer a land, then you would often take the women for yourself. The people of the town would take the women for themselves, and you would take the king's women. And this is to show, hey, I've definitely taken your kingdom because I took your women. If I've got your women, I've got your kingdom. And so Ahithophel says, I think that's what you should do, because David left behind 10 of his concubines. And so I think you should sleep with those women. And that will show not only that you've taken David's kingdom, but it'll also show the people that you've definitely broken ties with your dad. Well, normally, for us, first of all, again, this is not what we would do. This isn't a godly act to sleep with, a bunch of women all at once, and all of those things. We wouldn't do that. But if you were to do that, the thought process in our mind is, well, yeah, he's gonna, just go into his dad's house and take his dad's women as his wives. And so, everybody just assumes that he's sleeping with them because they all live there and he's taking them on as his wife. But no, this is all so graphic. What he does is he pitches a tent at the top of his dad's house on the roof, because the roofs were flat, and he ceremoniously, parades these women into his tent in front of all of the Israelites, so everybody can see, hey, I'm taking in my dad's women and I'm sleeping with them. And so again, crazy and graphic, and nothing that we can even comprehend these days, but this is what he does. And we'll talk later about what God would have to say about that, but this is how Ahithophel does when he first gets into the kingdom. And then after he does this, then Ahithophel says, okay, now I think you need to give me 12,000 men and I'll go after your dad, because he's probably weary from his travels and just generally discouraged. This would be the perfect time to attack. And I'm not going to kill any of the rest of the people with him. I'll only kill David because he's the only one that is a threat to you. And once he's gone, then I'm sure that the rest of the people will just follow you, because their king that they want to follow is dead, and so they might as well follow you. And then I'll be able to just bring them back to Jerusalem, and they'll accept you as king. And this sounds like a good plan to Absalom also. But this time, instead of just taking Ahithophel's advice, he turns to Hushai and he says, what do you think about this plan? And Hushai says, this time I do not think that's a good idea, because your dad is a good warrior. And so are all the rest of the people with him. Remember, Joab has been his commander since he was fighting with Saul. And so he's like, him and Abiathar, both of them are David's nephews, and they've been with him the whole time. Then he's got Attiah and all of the people that have followed him from Gath, so ever since Saul died. And so he's like, all of these are skilled warriors, and your dad's a skilled warrior. And so anybody that you have here is not near as experienced as him. And so 12,000 men isn't going to be enough, for one. Two, they are such skilled warriors that your dad is too smart to sleep with the rest of the troops. And so he's probably already hiding out somewhere in some ravine or pit or something. And he's also not going to leave all of his troops together. He's going to divide them up so that you can't kill everyone at once. And so, you're going to need a lot more men than that. And also, these men are not going to be running scared like Ahithophel said. They're mad because they got driven from their home just like David did. And so they're like a mama who's been robbed of her cubs, and they're going to be fighting mad. And so they're not going to run away. And since David is going to be hiding, you're going to have to approach them, and they're not going to run, so they're going to fight. And if you kill one of their people, then they're going to be so aggressive that y'all are going to run away. Nobody is going to be able to stand against them with just the 12,000 men. They're going to be angry. And so what I think you need to do is I think you need to gather people from all over Israel. Get as many men as you can from every single tribe. And I think you need to lead the charge because you're taking the kingdom from your dad. You need to actively take it, which is good advice. Take responsibility for what you are doing. Don't let someone else do it. And then he said, I also think that you need to kill everyone because, again, you're going to have to fight them. They're not going to run away from you. They're not going to just let you kill your dad and then leave and follow you. They're going to fight you. And if they fight you, you have to fight them back. And once you start fighting, you need to kill them all because if you don't and you leave anybody alive, they're going to keep coming after you until you're all dead. And, if you're able to, make them surrender, they won't surrender for long. They'll turn against you. They're not going to follow you. And so I think that you need to get all these people, as many as you can, lead the charge, and then kill all of, your dad and all of his men. And then come back and rule the people that actually want to be ruled by you. And Absalom and his all of his advisors, everybody that's with him, is like, that is a better plan. He's right. Well, so he goes to gather all of the people from Israel to come with him and fight. And meanwhile, Hushai is using this plan to stall. He's like, it's going to take him a while to get all of these people. And so I can get word to David while he's doing this, and then he'll have time to prepare. And so remember that David had sent back the two priests and said, if you ever need to send me a message through your two sons. And so Hushai runs to the priest and he says, I need you to send a young servant girl to the well that is in the place where your sons are hiding, or where they're at right now, to give them a message and let them know that they need to tell David that he needs to cross over the Jordan River because Absalom's men are coming, and if they don't get over on the other side of the river, then they're going to be trapped between Absalom's army and the water, and then they'll just be pushed into the water and die. And so they need to get across and get prepared and have the battle over there. And by sending this girl to tell them, it won't look suspicious. Everybody will just think she's going to get water. And so she can give this message, and then they can go and tell David. And so that's what happens. They send the girl, but there is a boy that sees what happened, and he catches on. He realizes, she's not just going to get water. She's giving a message to the priest's sons, and they're trying to get a message to David. And so he goes and tells Absalom. So Absalom sends some servants out to kill the priest's sons, or at least capture them and not allow them to get the message out to David. But they hurry and run. They know that, they need to get this message to David quickly. So they're running, and they hide in a cistern in the town of, I can't quite remember. Let's see if I can find the name. It's not even going to mean anything to y'all anyway, really, if I read it. But it's the same town that Shammai, the same Benjamite town that Shammai was cursing him and throwing the rocks at him from. And so everybody apparently from Saul's old tribe doesn't hate David because he's in the same town, and a woman hides them there in the cistern. She covers it with grain so that nobody knows they're there. And then when the servants come and ask if she's seen the men, she says, yeah, they already crossed over the brook. And so she sends them on the way. They go to look for these men. They can't find them. They finally return back to Jerusalem. And when the coast is cleared, they leave and they go and tell David, what's going on. And it says, by morning, David has already gone to across the river, and everybody is across the river. And then we find out that during this time, the Ahithophel, when he realizes that Absalom didn't take his advice, he's like, well, we're all going to die now. And so I'm not going to go with them to battle. I'm not going to get killed by David and his men. I am a definite betrayer because he was working in the council of David. And so he says, they'll be after me. I'm not going to allow them the satisfaction of killing me. I'm going to kill myself. And so he goes to his house, gets everything in order, kills himself, and is buried in his dad's tomb. And then Absalom takes as his commander his other cousin. So David has Joab and Abiathar, which are his nephews, cousins to Absalom. And this guy is a cousin to both Absalom and Joab and Abiathar. They're all sisters of David's mom. And so kids of the sisters. So anyways, they're all their cousins. And so he chooses Amasa to be his commander. And then David takes Abiathar, Joab, and Attiah and separates his troops in thirds and makes each one of them commander over those troops. And then he gets all the way to, they all go before he separates them out. They all go north 37 miles to the place that Ishbosheth was ruling whenever he was an opposing king to David. So remember that right after Saul died, Abner, his commander, put Ishbosheth, his only living son, in charge as the new king. But Judah adopted David as king. So David was ruling in Hebron, and Ishbosheth had crossed the river, and he was ruling over all of Israel except for Judah in this city in Gilead on the eastern side of the Jordan. Well, David was ruling in Jerusalem when his son went to Hebron, which is where he ruled over Judah, and he pronounced himself the king of Hebron. But then when David left, he went into Jerusalem, and David went into the basically capital that Ishbosheth ruled from on the eastern side of the Jordan. And so again, there are two kings, each ruling, one in Jerusalem, one in Gilead. And so that's how this is playing out right now. And when David got there, 3 men came to welcome him. One of the men, he is the brother of Hanam, which is the vassal king that David put in charge of the Ammonites. Whenever they defeated the Ammonites, he let an Ammonite still rule over that land, but he was under David's control. And this is his brother. And this would have been a perfect time for them to, rebel against David, but apparently they like him. And so he comes and brings some animals and some food to him, along with Machir, which was the one who sheltered Mephibosheth whenever, remember, he is the only son that lived of Jonathan's whenever Jonathan and Saul and all of his brothers got killed. Jonathan's brothers got killed in the battle. His son is the only one that survived because he was very young. The nurse was running with him. She dropped him, he became crippled. And so Machir is the one that took him in, and David found him at Machir's house and brought him to Jerusalem to take care of him there. And so this guy Machir also came to take care of David whenever he fled from his son. And then the third man that came was a wealthy man from Gilead, and they all brought David, basically things that he would need, animals and food and all of that. And then David divided his army up amongst those three men that I told you about before, and then sends them out to battle. And he says that he wants to go with them to battle. And they're like, yeah, that's a bad idea. You're the only one they want. And so even if we all ran away, they would still come to kill you. So no point in that. And then if they killed half of us, they wouldn't care. They only want you. You're worth 10,000 of us. And so you need to stay here. And David's like, okay, that's fine. I get it. You're right. I'll stay here. But please be gentle with young Absalom. And so, we don't know if he's calling him young Absalom because it's like, he's my baby, he's my son still, be gentle with him. Or if it's because he's like, he's just a hot-headed young guy. He isn't thinking clearly, he's not old and wise like we are. And so please be gentle with him because he's not thinking clearly. He's not doing the right thing here. Either way, he's like, basically don't kill my son. I know you have to go out to battle, but be gentle with him. And so they all go out to battle. It says in the forest of Ephraim, but there's a little problem with that because Ephraim doesn't have any land on the eastern side of the Jordan. And this is actually the land that belongs to the half tribe of Manasseh that has stayed there on that eastern side. But that's not a lie, because the reason that they called it the land of Ephraim is because both Ephraim and Manasseh were Joseph's children, remember? And all of Jacob's children each received one piece of land. That's what is called the tribes of Israel, is each one of his 12 children. And Joseph was one of his 12 children. But because Joseph got sold into slavery and he, had a bad life, Jacob said, I will take both of your sons that were born before I came here to Egypt, and I'll give each one of them a piece of land as if they were my sons. And so they got each one of them a piece of land. Instead of Joseph getting one piece of land, he got two, basically. And so since Ephraim, even though Ephraim was the youngest son, Jacob gave him the oldest child's blessing. And since he gave him the oldest child's blessing, all of Joseph's land is sometimes called by the name of Ephraim. It's basically saying Joseph's land by calling it by his oldest son, even though this is Manasseh's land. Okay, so they're in the forest there in Gilead is basically what it is. And that's what it was. It was Gilead's land before Manasseh took it over. And so it says that David's men defeated them that day, Absalom's men, and 20,000 men died there in the forest. And it said that the forest killed more people than the sword. So the terrain and the trees and the density of the forest killed more men than the sword. But Absalom also got killed by the forest because it says that he was riding underneath an oak tree and he got hung by the branches of the oak tree by his long, luscious hair. Remember, this was his glory, that he had this long, luscious hair. And his hair was flying as he's riding his mule, and it gets caught up in the branches and he's hanging there. And one of David's men sees this, and he runs to Joab and tells Joab that, he saw him hanging from the tree. And Joab's like, well, did you kill him? And he's like, no, I didn't kill him. And he's like, well, I would have given you 4 ounces of gold and a belt if you would have killed him. And he's like, You couldn't pay me 25 pounds worth of gold to kill David's son. He's like, I heard him telling y'all to be gentle with his son, and there's no way that I'm going to kill his son. The king knows everything. He would have found out, and you would have thrown me under the bus. I know it. And so he's like, that's not worth it to me. Joab's like, fine, I don't have time to fight here with you. I'm going to kill him myself. Remember, Joab is the one that brought Absalom back and tried to reconcile him and David in the first place. And there was speculation that he had some sort of evil intent towards David when he did that, but that doesn't make any sense because he has joined David now. And so he seemingly was trying to reconcile David with his son for David's sake. And now David's son has betrayed him too. It's like, I brought you back. I was doing that for your dad, but I got you, back into the family, and now you have betrayed him. And so you betrayed me too. And so it probably gives him some satisfaction to be the one that kills him. He definitely wants him dead. And so he leaves and finds Absalom in the tree, and it says throws 3 javelins at him, kills him, but also his armor bearers surround him, 10 of them, and they also strike Absalom while he's hanging there in a tree, just for good measure, just so they can make sure that he's dead. And then Joab blows the trumpet and calls off all his men and says, we've won the battle, quit fighting. Leave the rest of the guys alone. And then they don't dignify Absalom with a proper burial. Instead, they dig a pit and throw his body in the pit and throw a pile of rocks over the top of it. And some say that maybe this had a little bit of symbolism too, because maybe it was as if they were like stoning him, even though that's not how they killed him. When you throw all those stones on top of him, that would be symbolizing stoning him. And that was actually the punishment for a son who was rebellious and unrepentant about it. Like basically just like, I am never going to do what you say, Dad. You're not my boss. I'm doing what I want. And I'm completely, totally, rebelling against you. And so, obviously he has done that with David, providing he was trying to kill David. And so they were saying, maybe it had a little symbolism that they just cover him with a big pile of rocks. It also drew a stark contrast between a pillar that Absalom set up for himself in the King's Valley, which is just outside of Jerusalem, because he said, I don't have any sons to carry on my name, so I'm going to set this pillar up for myself in my own name because I don't have anybody else to carry on my name. And so this would have been like this big monument that he set up for himself. And they're like, yeah, you don't get that. You just get a big pile of rocks. And so he got, obviously, what he deserved.